10 days ago, the United States and Israel launched nearly 900 airstrikes on Iran in 12 hours. They eliminated the supreme leader. They even eliminated most, if not all, of the Iranian leadership. They called it preemptive defense. But now Iran has a new supreme leader, the old one's son. A regime that was born rejecting monarchy just installed the dynasty. And the US Congress, well, it never voted. No declaration of war, no authorization, nothing. Just $1 billion a day in bombs and a doctrine no one agreed to. So here's the question. When both governments use crisis to grab power that they were never really given by the people, who exactly is defending liberty? What is the cost of such a power grab? This is Liberty Lens. Let's get into it. And of course, to help us answer these questions is none other than my friend and co-host, Mr. Mike Tremont. Mike, outside of a war, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine, John. The big problem is that, of course, we are at war, and it's debilitating for the United States on a number of levels.
It really is because you've got the human toll, you've got the economic toll, and certainly the political toll as well. So you've got it all kind of wrapped up here. It's not as much of a cakewalk as people think. And Mike, do you agree that there might be some cognitive dissonance because this war is happening thousands of miles away? We really don't understand the. I think we have trouble appreciating the severity of it, the weightiness of it. So the same way someone says, if someone says, "Hey, you lost $100," you feel that in some ways more than you lost $1 trillion, right? Because $1 trillion is such a big number; people don't really comprehend it.
That's a really interesting point. I think you're spot on. The fact that our economy is so dependent on the price of oil is about to bring this war in terms of cost home to the gas pump. We are going to be significantly affected by the price of oil, and it's going to bring things home to roost. I think that the American public will quickly see that this affects us in a really important way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not happy for the impending suffering that's going to come. But I think in some ways it's necessary for people to understand. All the people cheering and waving the American flag right now, I think they really need to really have this hit home for them in order for any change to come. But before we get into that, very slight, let's do a quick recap. Since the war started, I know the administration may have different terms for it, but since the war started with Iran, there have been more than 2,000 combined airstrikes. It is costing $1 billion a day for these airstrikes and for these actions. There have been
And to have the personnel there, a big eat is the fuel that drives the floating naval bases that we call aircraft carriers.
right, and of course, Iran, in the process of defending itself, has decided to target U.S. assets in the region, and there have been U.S. casualties now. And of course, I think this is not uh, unplanned. We're not getting exact numbers of the casualties coming out of the administration. So I think that also is being obfuscated by the administration because they need this thing to be a popular war because it is a war of choice. It's not a war of necessity. Now, in Iran, as we mentioned, Ali Khamenei, who was the supreme leader, I think he was 86. He was killed in the initial strikes, as was most of the leadership. So if we thought that cutting off the one dictatorial head would have helped us out, much like in Greek mythology, this Hydra just sprouted up another head. Usually it was two heads. Khamenei's son, Motaba Khamenei, was just selected by I think it's called the Board of Experts, I think is the official
The
title.
the 88 clerics that make up the board of experts.
Right, the Board of Experts, 88 of them, very good, selected his son. Now, do you have any insight for us, Mike, from what you've been able to gather about what type of guy is this? Is he a reformer? Is he more hardline? We know that he's not a cleric, But then again, neither was his father, right? He was not an Ayatollah.
Well, he's a cleric. He's just not at the high level Ayatollah type cleric that you might expect would take over if this were truly a theocracy.
He was not the Pope equivalent. He was a cardinal.
He was not the Pope equivalent, wasn't even the Ayatollah equivalent. And I think that that is your first clue. It's not so much what he is as much as a matter of what he's not.
Mm.
He is not someone who is going to give the true power brokers a hard time. We call these people dictators, but the truth of the matter is that the clerics are a front
Mm.
for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, decides who's in power. They're the ones with the guns. And if you get along with these people, you can remain in power for as long as Mataba's dad, Ali, remained in power, which is decades, right? More than 3 decades after the Ayatollah passed away before him. And if you get on the wrong side of these people, you're going to be out in an hour and a half. They don't care that he's not, Ayatollah level cleric. He's a mid-level cleric. They don't care. It conveys a continuation of the regime. It sends the signal that whoever was in power before still is. And from the IRGC's standpoint, it's guess who's in power and has 2 thumbs, right?
Right.
We're still calling the shots. They don't need everyone to rally around that concept. They don't need for that to be a matter of public discussion. They just need the reality of having in power who it is that they want in power, because they have a great deal at stake.
Right. And just formally, Motaba has had IRGC connections all along,
All along,
and he's been accused of
he knows how to butter his bread.
right. And I think personally, I don't know if it's actually been proven, Mike, but I think it's pretty well assumed that he has been responsible for some violent suppression of political opponents, of reformers
Yeah.
in Iran, right? So he's not like
Yeah, he's an operator. He's a go-between between the clerics and the IRGC. He's the guy you go to if you want certain things to happen. Extremely loyal to the IRGC, to his father, and especially to the intersection of those two. He is a walking, talking representative of the cooperative arrangement between the IRGC and this group of 88 clerics. And they know how to butter their bread also. If you want to remain part of the 88, you know how to vote, right?
right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look,
Don't vote wrong and start your car tomorrow.
right. Exactly. So if the U.S. was hoping to cripple Iranian leadership or to steer the ship in a certain direction politically, we may not have accomplished that, in the sense that we took out their leadership and it just seems like the exact same leadership, maybe a younger version of it, has cropped
Yeah.
up in its place.
Well, and there's more where that came from. If the Israelis or the Americans are working together, were to assassinate Mataba, which is what the Israelis are threatening to do next,
Right.
there's plenty. There's no shortage of clerics that the IRGC could put up as one fig leaf after another. It just doesn't matter. I wouldn't bother wasting the missile.
Hmm.
It just there's nothing that can be accomplished by replacing heads over and over again. Either the IRGC is going to remain in power or it's not. And this is an extremely powerful military organization that controls a huge proportion of the economy, let that sink in Iran, that has a deep relationship with the Iranian regular military. And I don't think most Americans appreciate that the total aggregate military in Iran is approaching 1 million personnel. This is not a medium-sized organization. This is a giant fighting force And the idea that these people are going to leave office easily is just abject silliness.
And I think, though, I agree with you. But before we move on from this, because I think understanding the war's objectives from the U.S. point of view, I'm not even talking about the Israeli point of view,
Yep.
their security, but from our point of view, it becomes very interesting because if decapitating whoever's sitting in the big chair in Iran just results in the next guy taking that same spot, one has to wonder exactly what the U.S. is after. Because President Trump, prior to Motaba being selected, flat out said, I don't want to see his son take over.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I understand it's bluster and everything, but all of a sudden, does this become an excuse for President Trump to say, I initially thought this war was going to take 4 or 5 weeks tops. Now we might be there a couple of months because, hey, they didn't listen to me. They put in this new guy, Motaba. I told them not to. And for some reason, they refused to listen to me.
I agree with you. I think we're on a knife's edge. It could go either way. I think the smart play is to realize that 4 weeks doesn't make a hill of beans of difference,
Right.
and that you're either into it for 4 years or you're into it for 4 days. That the whole 4 weeks thing is just absolute silliness.
Right.
The initial idea of funding and arming the Kurds on the Iranian side of the Iran Iraq border and having them foment some kind of revolution. They're going to charge the capital. Oy vey. That's a suicide mission from the Kurdish perspective. And the Kurds, to be fair, the Kurds don't have an interest in taking the capital.
Right.
The Kurds just want to secure their own homeland and make sure that they're left alone. And that could happen. That's fine. It's got nothing to do with American objectives. So either you're going to try to take care of business on their home turf, literally on their home turf, against an army of 1 million, to the point of replacing the IRGC as the organization calling the shots in Tehran. That's option A. That's bad, right? That's bad. That's hundreds of thousands of people dying, thousands of Americans.
Well,
That's
it's
bad.
the whole Mujahideen thing all over again, right? It's literally the same playbook
Exactly.
where you're arming a rebel group, hoping they take over, and then when they do, they'll be your puppets. And we saw how that turned out in Afghanistan.
It doesn't go well. Or you're putting, uh, 50,000 American troops there.
Yeah, and again, for those of us old enough, Mike, maybe I'll put you in the same category. Uh, it's very analogous to what Barry Goldwater said during the Vietnam War. And I know Goldwater, from a libertarian point of view, may have had some objectionable things, but the one thing he said, which as also I think he was an Air Force general as well as a U.S. senator, he said, "Listen, there's no such thing as half pregnant when it comes to war. Either you fight this war to win, or you do retreat. You just withdraw every single U.S.
That's right.
So
And the United States, over and over again, underestimates the difficulty of suppressing an army on its home turf, an army whose technology is inferior to your own, but because of the numbers, it's a very deadly proposition. So that's A, and A sucks. Option B is what we should have been pursuing all along rather than even initiating this, which is negotiation.
right,
And now, the Trump administration claims that the Obama administration sucked at it. And that may have been true. Remember, Obama famously said, "What's the alternative? Going to war?" And Trump said that he did a crappy job of negotiating the deal, and that apparently war should have been on the table. I think that the only way to have handled this from the get-go in a reasonable fashion would have been to threaten war and to step it up slowly, right? Rather than 1,000 strikes on the same on the first day. It would have been 100 here, 100 there, and then eventually you're talking about real numbers. But gradually, so the Iranians knew that we were serious, and give them an off ramp. With no off ramp, there's no capability of negotiation, and that's where we are now. Is that we have backed the Iranians into a corner. We've said we won't accept anything less than unconditional surrender, and we're not interested in negotiating short of that. Well, okay, so what's that mean if you're the IRGC? It means, okay, I guess we're in an all out war and we'll just wait for your boots to be on the ground before we shoot them.
Yeah, because as you said, it doesn't give them any options. If you're a dictator and there's no option for you to retain power, what incentive do you have to negotiate?
Right, it's all they care about.
Right, it's the other end of the spectrum, right? Like if you don't
Right.
threaten war, why should they pay attention to you? So in
No, it's like someone coming after you or me and saying, okay, the first thing we want is your kids. Well, that ain't going to happen. So we might as well start shooting each other.
right. Yeah, it seems to be a very strange position to be in.
Yep.
Are we starting to see some of the blowback on the U.S. side? Just before we move on to the economics and everything, because you know we're starting to hear about casualties, and again, people could tell you, so many Iranians were killed, non-IRGC, and for us, it may just be a concept again. We don't feel it. But
Yep.
first, we heard initially six U.S. in the initial phases of this, six U.S. service people
Yep.
were killed. There's going to be more. There are more. They're just not being reported right now. Also, reports that the U.S. bombed, I believe, an elementary school,
Yeah. The girls' school.
the girls'
Yep.
school. Now,
By mistake.
by mistake, not on
By
purpose,
mistake.
but it is something that should be on the nation's conscience, don't you think? Because, and when President Trump was, I forget the reporter's name, but good on him. It was a young fellow. He got up there and he said, no, it's U.S. Tomahawks that hit it. It wasn't. And Trump was. Did you see him? He was flabbergasted. He goes, well, sometimes other countries use Tomahawks. We sell them.
Now, President Trump is way over. He's out of his element here. He's over his head in this silly discussion. He never should have said it was someone else. If you don't want to admit that it's the United States, and it was, okay, let me just say that definitively now. It was the United States. In case anyone's listening who's wondering, you don't need to wonder. It was the United States. It was a mistake. And it was a mistake that the Iranians share for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But if you don't want to admit that it was the United States, what you say is that it's under investigation, which is what Pete Hegseth said. Now, Pete knows darn well it was the United States, and he doesn't want to admit it, not only because he just doesn't want it to be out there, but also because his boss is blaming someone else. So Pete's in a tough spot. Pete's obviously over his head in this communications challenge as well. But when you deny reality, to your point, John, as we all know, ever since Richard Nixon, you make it bigger.
Right.
You make it bigger, and the truth is that the death toll on the Iranian side is quickly approaching 2,000, and we don't know whether that is underreported or exaggerated. Who knows? But that's probably the order of magnitude, right? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. It's probably not 100 or 100,000, right? It's on the order of a small number of thousands. Okay. We should be internalizing that a little bit already. We should be lamenting the loss of life at that scale. And so another 160-ish or whatever the number is that tragically were lost in that accidental Tomahawk bombing of the girls' school. That's the context. It's not just 160. It's 1,600. It's 2,000. And all of those lives are lamentably lost.
Right.
That's a big deal. And we should be focusing on all of it. Now, let me mention the reason that the Iranians need to share in some of this tragedy, besides the fact that they didn't negotiate and the United States shares in that as well. These are two sides that did not negotiate in good faith, and that's why we're at war. Okay.
Right.
aside from that, the girls' school was located in a building next to an IRGC facility in one of the buildings that used to be used by the IRGC. Okay, I'm not suggesting that means it deserves to be blown up.
Right.
But if you were conscientiously doing everything you could think of to protect your children, you would not open a school next to the base using a building that used to be controlled by the base, that from the air looks like one of the, we've all seen the pictures now.
Right.
It looks just like one of the buildings that's still controlled by the IRGC.
Right. Right. I mean, I don't think anyone is of the mindset that it was an intentional strike, or
Right.
even in the initial calculations that it was like, oh, there's like a 50% chance or a 20% chance. I don't think anybody thought of it like that. But it just goes to show you that unintended consequences, and just because they're unintended, it doesn't mean you're unaccountable for them. So so
Right.
so yeah, it was an accident, but accidents need to be paid for. There has to be accountability. Like, you don't just get to say, I accidentally ran into the back of your Plymouth, so it's like, yeah, okay, it was an accident. There was no malice, but you got to take care of it. So I think
And to your
as we see these things happen, do you feel that the American appetite for war is going to decrease, or, and I hate to say this, especially with the way the White House tends to frame these things, is this more of a like, "Oorah, let's go get some more" type of inflection point?
I think this is going to cut against the administration, and the reason I think that is because this, what we've seen so far, is as well as the war can go.
Mm.
Right? No economic blowback, very little political blowback, some political blowback from Spain and the United Kingdom, which have come around to support us at this point. So, very little blowback either economically so far, not zero, and same on the political front. Very few American casualties. Not a giant number of the Israeli casualties, I guess, are north of 100, but they're not in the thousands. So it's, the cost is relatively limited, and the number of tragedies for which we're responsible so far is only one of this order of magnitude, right? But all those numbers are going to go up, to your point, right? All of those costs are going to increase, both in terms of money, uh, economic blowback that you and I are going to discuss in a moment, political blowback. All of that is going to get larger, and I don't see any end in sight other than a political negotiation, which could have been had a month ago. And so it's going to be a rough road. I think politically for the White House, it's going to be a rough road if they don't try to bring this to a conclusion pretty quick.
Mm.
You made an interesting point that just because it's a mistake doesn't mean you're not accountable for it.
Right.
Absolutely true. And there is a feeling sometimes that it is analogous to running into the back of someone's car. You didn't mean it. Yeah, but it's not exactly the same as if you were driving under the speed limit.
Right.
If you're out there speeding and driving drunk and you slam into the back of someone's car and you didn't mean it, you're right. It's not as bad as if you did mean it, which would be an attempted homicide.
Right.
But just because you didn't mean it doesn't mean you weren't doing things that could be expected to lead to that, right?
And
What Rumsfeld used to call the known unknowns. Like, you don't know exactly how it's going to go,
right.
but it's going to hit the fan.
It's in the probability set, is
Yeah.
when you're talking about set theory, right? But okay, so you should have known better. You could have tried to mitigate the potential, but you still had consequences, and you're responsible as well for the consequence. Because you're right, like, intention matters, but it doesn't impact the results, right? So I didn't mean to hit you. I didn't mean to bomb that school, but I did end up bombing that school. So you still have that. You mentioned we were talking about the American appetite. Just very quickly, want to wrap it up. Do you think the president only has as long as the midterm elections, in essence, to wrap this up in terms of the war and achieving whatever objectives he wants to achieve? Because
He doesn't have anywhere near that long.
okay, I was going to ask you because
He has got until, you know, he's got until the end of April.
that's all you're giving them. Is that because they both fail? But we mentioned Massey and Kana had that they put forth the resolution to vote on HR 38 to stop President Trump from conducting this war until he gets congressional approval. A similar bill was put forth in the Senate. That failed largely along partisan lines. Now, what's interesting is
Amazingly along partisan lines.
very amazing in the Senate. So in the Senate, there were only two flip flops. The Democrats lost one and the Republicans lost one, right? So on the Republican side, it was very easy. It was Rand.
Yeah, the Republicans got John Fetterman and his sweatshirt.
I was going to say, Fetterman defected from the Democrat ranks, uh, uh, Rand Paul, as expected, from the Republican ranks. Are you surprised that there wasn't even one other Republican senator that would have joined Paul?
I was to be fair. I thought that someone would have joined Paul. He does give a little bit of cover, being a Republican, voting to limit presidential power. I think that logic also was on Paul's side in the sense that Congress should be hemming in the president's power, right? On the other hand, Fetterman coming over, I found just as surprising, because it's one thing to say I think the war is a good idea. And I think a lot of Americans figure, in the grand scheme of things, this is a regime in Tehran that had to go. One way or another, this had to go. You can all argue around the edges of how the strike should have taken place, how much negotiation, yada, yada, yada. A lot of Americans would have said it's a war, at least an attack, that has to be waged, that has to be played out. It's another thing, however, to say, and therefore the president should be given carte blanche with no congressional, no Senate, no House of Representatives oversight. That's a different beast. And I think that what we're learning is probably something you and I have known for quite some time, is the American people don't pay much attention to the accountability structures, right? It's just a matter of whether the policy is tolerable or whether the policy is not tolerable. And as I believe the White House is about to learn in a real hard fashion, whether that policy is good or bad rides on the success of the operation. And right now, we all think of this operation as being incredibly successful. But if it does not achieve regime change and drives down the stock market and up the price of oil and trips us into a recession, which we hope won't happen. But if those things do happen, this is not going to look like a successful operation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, right? So politically, we saw that both resolutions, both bills failed, but there was more tolerance for it than you would have thought, perhaps, under a complete Republican Congress, right? Like the fact that they even hit the floor may have been surprising to some people initially, and certainly to President Trump. Now, using that statement you made as a segue, you and I have been saying I think the U.S. economy is on the edge of a recession if it's not already in there, the beginnings of it, right? And one of the things that historically, if you look at the business cycles, if you look at the economic cycles, there's a couple of things that kind of push you into a deep recession, borderline depression, right? It's unemployment, inflation, or the dreaded stagflation, right, where just nothing happens. Um, and one of those things is the price of oil, commodities, and that when oil skyrockets, late 70s, whether it's through war, whether it's through geopolitical tensions, or just OPEC saying we're going to cut down production, right? That has always been almost the fuse, the straw that breaks the camel's back when everything else is on the edge, right, Mike? We saw oil shoot up.
Yeah.
What happens if those trade routes, the Straits of Hormuz, become compromised? People aren't afraid to send their tankers through there. Uh, the dollar doesn't cut it in terms of paying for those tankers and paying for those oils if it doesn't settle in the dollar. What if all of a sudden, what China's sitting there smiling, Mike? They're saying like, "Hey, use the yuan. You could settle your debts in the yuan. We're not involved in anything." This is
Well,
this is
the good news from the standpoint of the US dollar is that the Chinese economy is at least as screwed as the American economy. The good news from the standpoint of the American economy is that we produce a lot of oil. And so if the oil never makes it through the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that we need to talk about from a military operational standpoint as well. If the oil doesn't make it out of the Persian Gulf, Iranian oil, going back and forth, raw versus processed, if the oil doesn't get through, the price of oil skyrockets and stays there, right? We saw it go from 60 and $70 a barrel to well over 100 and then back down under 100 just in the last couple of days.
yeah.
If the price of oil stays up and the expectation is that it will remain high, then prices will come up in the United States even though we have enough oil. If the world price goes up, this will severely hamper the Chinese economy. And the increased price will hamper the American economy. Already, we saw American stocks tumble in value. Remember, the White House was crowing about the fact that the Dow Jones was over 50,000.
Pam Bondi famously when she was talking about the Epstein files.
Yeah, which is weird.
Yeah,
Which is weird.
yeah.
And now we're down closer to 47,000. That's a huge decline in the last couple of weeks. Not all due to the war, but most of it due to the war in Iran and the price of oil. That's a big deal. That loss of wealth among Americans, represented by the decline in the value of their portfolios, is enough to trip us into a recession, combined with the price of oil. That's enough to trip us into a recession, and we're hoping that we can avoid that. And the only way to avoid that is if the markets expect this to be resolved relatively quickly. If the war continues, this will not be resolved relatively quickly. And the reason for that is that the Iranians still have enough firepower, even though it's been largely diminished, right? Reports are that drone strikes are down like 80% and missile strikes from the Iranians are down like 90%.
Right.
So things are going very well from the American standpoint and very poorly from the Iranian standpoint. However, it does not take an enormous number of drones and missiles to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. If you can we talk about the numbers just for a moment?
Sure. Go ahead.
As far as the military conflict goes, the Iranians have launched something like 1,400, 1,500 drone strikes, and they're way down. Okay, so we were doing 100 or 200 a day. The Iranians were. Now we're down to, I don't know, 20 or 30 a day, something like this.
Right.
Okay, that means they still have a number of drones. And we don't know what that number is. And they're launched from trucks that are very mobile. So you can't know where they are. You can't know how many of them there are. You have some guesses and you run around trying to kill off these drones and the launchers that go with it. Same thing with the missiles. Same thing with the missiles.
It's the equivalent of fighting a guerrilla warfare. Yeah.
It's guerrilla warfare. Absolutely. Okay. So let's say the Iranians have hundreds of drones left, not thousands. And we're quickly killing off the factories that can produce these. and there's no good place for them to buy them. Indeed, they had been selling them to the Russians, which is weird. Let's say the Iranians only have hundreds of drones left. Let's say that they don't waste them attacking military bases anymore,
Right.
or attacking, the good people of Kuwait and Oman and the UAE and Qatar, right? Let's say they stop that silliness, which is stupid, objectively stupid
Right.
politically, because they're just dragging in people who hate them, dragging them into the war. Bad idea. Let's say that they resolve to hoard their missiles and their drones. You cannot get through the Strait of Hormuz with an oil tanker without fearing an attack from dozens and dozens of drones all at the same time. Now, the American military says they can handle this. You've got multiple naval vessels out there. You've got air capability. You've got radar all over the place, right? You can strike these down. The issue is, if the Iranians launched 100 drones all at the same time and they're coming from 4 different directions, and those 4 directions are defined by northeast, southwest, as long as different altitudes, there's some coming straight down out of the
Right.
sky,
Right.
right? That's not easy. And it only takes a couple to get through to ruin an oil tanker. This is why oil tankers cannot get insurance. It's why they can't get assurance that they're going to be safe. And that's why no one is going through the Strait of Hormuz today.
Well, if you think about it, even if you took the U.S. assertions of being able to protect the Strait of Hormuz at face value, the U.S. still has to expend resources to do so that it otherwise would not. So there's still a huge cost to maintaining the security of the Strait of Hormuz that you never had to consider before, right? Or I shouldn't say never, but not to the extent where you're spending $500 million, $1 billion a day for security purposes, right?
Right.
So that alone will drive up the cost of oil because it has to be paid for somewhere, right? Eventually.
And how long is that going to last?
And how, like, what if
hundreds of days means hundreds of billions of dollars.
Exactly. And for an economy that's already keeping inflation furiously at bay, even though it's going up, we're trying to keep it at bay because of the president's tariffs and whatnot and his other economic policies. All of a sudden, this war has cost, this was not a planned expense, this war. So the tens of billions of dollars that are already out the window, you're not going to find those in Doge savings anywhere, right? This is a hardship on the economy. So Mike, from your perspective, okay, we're going to put the security there. We're going to put the necessary military force there to keep them open. That in itself is a cost, which may end up being a wash with whatever drop in the price of oil or maintenance in the price of oil you may achieve, right?
It's a disaster either way. And remember, the Iranians are incurring an expense in the millions in order to force an expense in the billions on the American military. So they can keep that up all day long. They can keep that up the rest of the year while we hunt down these missile launchers and drone attacks. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Iranians also have these small boats. By small, we mean 40, 50, 60, 70 feet. They're basically high-powered, armed fishing boats, and they have hundreds of them. We've destroyed dozens of them, and we're very proud of having destroyed dozens of them. The other thing to keep in mind is the Iranians have what are reported to be as many as hundreds of what they call relatively small boats. These are 40, 50, 60, 70 feet long. They're basically high-powered, heavily armed fishing boats. And the United States military is saying that we have destroyed dozens, maybe 50 of them, and larger craft. Maybe the only thing that the Iranian Navy has left, if you want to call it a navy, is these small boats. Okay, let's say they only have 100 of them left. That's a problem,
Sure.
right? That is a problem. To use them effectively may require suicide missions, but through remote control and through suicide piloting, you can close the Strait of Hormuz with nothing but these small boats. And then the third thing the Iranians have, if the first is air power and the second is these small boats, the third thing that the Iranians have is a small number of small submarines. It does not take a lot of submarines to either attack an oil tanker or to mine the Persian Gulf. So you see where this is going. The multi pronged approach from the Iranian military, combined with the risk aversion of the people that own these oil tankers, right? It's one thing to say, yeah, you're probably going to get through. Probably doesn't cut it, because it's another thing to guarantee it. And these people are not sending these ships through unless safe passage
Well,
is absolutely guaranteed.
it's just like any other proposition, right? The more dangerous the activity. I mean, we talked about it, say, when we talked about potential U.S. businesses finding their way to Ukraine as part of the reconstruction. Well, who's going to go there, or what's the premium they want for going there, right?
Yeah. It better be pretty
Exactly,
darn
and it's the
safe
same
before
thing
you
here.
break
Yeah,
ground.
okay. The U.S., as we said, the U.S. military can guarantee safety all it wants, but there's going to be a premium, and now you're going to have to pay the crews extra to take those tankers. Like you said, you can't get insurance on them, so that means exactly, exactly. So
Who's going
it's
to be the
not a
first?
situation we should be taking lightly. All right, Mike. So now, militarily, it kind of is shaping up again. Back to our own U.S. history, it's like the U.S. in the Revolutionary War, right? You had this huge leviathan of an empire, the British Empire, the British military, the British Navy, huge. Nobody in their right mind would fight them on their own terms. And obviously, as school children, we all learned that. Like part of the success of the U.S. Revolution was the fact that it adopted guerrilla warfare tactics, where the redcoats were in a straight line, the blue coats were scattered in the bushes and taking pot shots and whatnot, right? Are we facing the same sort of
Yep.
thing? Yeah, the U.S. clearly has the superior military, Navy, Air
Yep.
Force, armed services. But to your point, small boats, 1 and 2 man boats, drones. You don't need a hell of a lot. You don't
Yep.
need to accomplish a lot, and you're fighting a determined, ideologically driven enemy that, in its mind, is defending its homeland. This is It is defending its
That is
homeland.
defending its
You're
homeland.
absolutely right. So it's not as, "Oh, we're
Yes.
sending people out to do fighting." They're like, "We're protecting our homeland," which adds another level of determination and difficulty, right?
Oh, of course. No, it's a nightmare. And to our earlier point, their military is possibly as large as a million strong. Even if you imagine that's going to be diminished for how many different reasons, possibly, everything from the economy collapsing to lack of hardware and diminished leadership and greater threats, greater risks, shorter lifespans. You can imagine that number getting cut in half, right? An army of a half a million people on their home turf, that is not a nation that you want to invade. This is the reason Harry Truman did
Right,
not want to invade
right.
Japan. I'm not suggesting that the Trump administration would ever consider dropping a nuclear warhead. That's beyond the pale for any administration. But you get the thought process that says it's just not worth an invasion. And if it's not worth an invasion, and it's not, then how are you going to open up the Hormuz Strait? How are you going to ensure that the flow of oil is restarted and maintained at the old level? And how are you going to achieve regime change? I just don't see these things happening in the long run without a giant cost that would not be in our interest. And that's why I think that the administration would be well advised to bring this to a close lickety split. I think the smart thing to do would be immediately, or at least over the next few days, reach out and say, all right, you people have a new leader. We don't like him, but apparently he's the guy with whom we have to negotiate. Let's cut a deal. What we're offering is that you can remain in power. What we want is inspections of your nuclear facilities or anything else in your nation that we ask for anytime we want, forever. That's the basic deal, right? Because the only thing they care about is staying in power. And the only thing we care about is making sure that they don't get a nuclear weapon. And everything else
Is that
is
an
just
unrealistic
bells and
demand on the part
whistles.
of the U.S.? I mean, if I were to show you a map of nations in this world that have nuclear capabilities in terms of weaponry, Iran is not on that list. You'd be surprised who is. And yet somehow, and this is like perhaps a philosophical slash political question, Mike, somehow Iran is the bad guy. And I'm not justifying their regime, but Pakistan has bombs, India has.
The difference, I hear where you're going, and it's not illogical. The big difference is that Pakistan hasn't said it's our mission, core mission, to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And Pakistan has not funded certain elements of Pakistan have been really bad players. I don't want to let them completely off the hook. But the Pakistani government has not funded these organizations like the Houthis and the Hezbollah and Hamas around the world, causing terrorism and death and destruction. In other words, the the reason the funding of Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis is so important is because it makes more credible. It's consistent with the Iranian regime's claim that it would wipe Israel off the face of the earth, right? It would be different if you could say, well, they're just shooting their mouth off. They just like to say stupid things. Well, they do like to say stupid things. They do like to shoot their mouth off. And then every once in a while, they put their money where their mouth is and they go off and they kill people. That's why we can't allow them to have
I mean,
a nuclear warhead.
I get that, and I
It's their
don't want
own
to
bad
drag this out too
behavior.
much, but again, it is the part of the opposition to the U.S. war with Iran, because again, to Rubio's statement earlier when this started was, are we also vested in the Israeli national interest? Because, like to use your example, Pakistan may not have vowed to wipe Israel off the map, but I'm sure you could find a lot of Pakistani officials who want to wipe India off the map. And the fact that the target is India and not
Right.
Israel, by your explanation, seems to make a whole lot of difference, right, Mike? Because no one is worried about Pakistan having a bomb pointing, what, 40 miles across a border at India, and vice versa, by the way, to be fair. Uh,
Well, and to be fair, India does have a bomb, and so
right. But
that probably
in
matters a
the
lot.
Iran Israel situation, Israel has the bomb, but the Iranians don't.
Right. And Marco Rubio would have been smart not to have said the Israelis were going to attack and therefore we had to attack. Right. He was only
Right.
talking about the timing. I get that. As he explained the next day, he was only talking
Right.
about the timing that we were going to bomb anyway. But he would have been well advised to keep his trap shut when it comes to making it look like the United States government is the dog
Right.
being wagged by the
Right.
Israeli tail. And once you hear that, it's hard to unhear. And your point is that the American objectives seem to be at least influenced, and what we worry about is captured by the Israeli government's interests, right? In the interests of the Israeli people, which are
Sure.
completely
Sure.
reasonable in this context, right? I have always said, we in the liberty movement, we've always said that these nations deserve and should have, both for ethical reasons and tactical reasons and strategic reasons, completely independent decision making apparatus
Right.
for determining your foreign policy. And a piece of that is requiring your commander in chief, your military, to go to Congress for approval. And when you skip that step, you open yourself up to these criticisms. And I think that these criticisms are valid. We should have had a public debate about how important is it that we bomb Iran in terms of how quickly we turn up the heat, the resources we're willing to dedicate, the risk that we're willing to run, the risk of recession, the ethical issues, how do our allies feel about it? One of the things that we haven't spent much time talking about is the extraordinary embarrassment of having the United Kingdom say that we wouldn't be allowed to
Mm.
use one of their air bases. Wow! Because they considered this attack to have been illegal. Wow! Now they've changed their mind. They've come around. I don't know how they've reinterpreted law to say that now it's legal, whereas it
Right.
wasn't. The Spanish as well. Wow, that's embarrassing. I don't mean, the Spanish opinion is strategically important, but the loss of European backing, the United Kingdom's special relationship, that's potentially a real loss at a time when we should be making nice with the Europeans as
Well, it
they
also
agree to
strains
spend
the whole
more on their
concept
own
of
self
NATO, right?
defense.
Because NATO was a defensive alliance. Now, there are those who argue like they shouldn't be participating in a war of choice that the United States started. I'm sure the U.S. viewpoint is completely
Right.
different. Hey, we paid for most of NATO for all these years, and now we want to use a couple of your bases, and you're not letting us. Wow, we're going to remember that. Like it,
Yeah, that's not a good investment. And it's the same thing with we've talked about this a dozen times. Foreign aid in general is a crappy investment. You give these people money, they say thank you, and they never call you again. They don't call you on your birthday, they don't call you on your anniversary. They just take the money,
well,
they say thank you, and that's it.
even if you view it as a treaty and not foreign aid, the treaty being for defensive purposes, you know, it, the fact that the president says this was for defensive purposes and the Europeans are like, hell no, it's not. You chose to attack them, right? That also further weakens the relationship, as you said, not just with England, who has always been an ally of preference and choice and a staunch ally, but all of Europe now is like, why are you trying to drag us into this, right? So
Yep.
I think that's a strain that most people haven't considered as they analyze this. It's like that's an added strain there. All right.
Yep. Oh, absolutely, especially because what happens if someone in support of Iran were to attack a nation that's a NATO
Yeah,
member?
I would think so.
Is that Article 5?
Yeah.
I would think so too. The Europeans don't
I
want a
don't blame
piece
them
of
either
that.
because they're
And
also
I don't
between
blame them.
us and Iran, if you look at it geographically, right?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
have to
they're going to
live in
bear the
this
brunt
part of
of
the
any
world,
terrorist
right?
acts, retribution, retaliation, all that stuff. So they're going to get hit first. So yeah, I understand their position. All right, Mike, let
Yep.
me sort of end it on, or try to end it on this question, which is, do you think there's any one potential event um, that would put such political pressure on the administration that they cease hostilities? And that could be like, will it take a terrorist attack on US soil? Would it take the reinstitution of a draft? Will it take the stock market tanking? Will it take a recession? Will it take the midterms? I know you said that timing's a little too far out. Do you think there's any single events in the immediate horizon that you think just,
Yeah, absolutely. The stock market crash absolutely would do it. Um, a bad attack on U.S. soil, absolutely, but it wouldn't have to go quite that far. loss of military personnel in theater is something that it's not obvious that
Right.
the American public is prepared for
They're
that.
not prepared for Vietnam. They're not prepared.
They're not prepared for Vietnam. It's
Correct.
nor should they be. Nor should they be. And remember that the United States military is doing very well. The administration doesn't have to say, this isn't Vietnam. The administration doesn't have to say, well, this didn't work out and we lost and now we have to go home in shame. None of that, right? This is a much easier off ramp. You get to declare victory and negotiate your way out. And I do believe that while the negotiation is going to look complex and have all kinds of bells and whistles, at the end of the day, it's going to be relatively simple. All the Iranian
Right.
regime wants is to remain in power. They can live without a nuclear weapon. They can live
Right.
in
Right.
shame, but they can live. The big thing they want is to remain in power and not die. And we can give them that. And the one thing that we want is they
Is
can't have a
there
nuclear weapon.
a scenario in your mind where the U.S. kind of has an off ramp defined? They're about to get on the off ramp, and then somehow the foreign or the national interests of Israel step in and say, well, this can't be over because we're still threatened by Iran, thereby keeping us involved in the conflict.
Well, I think that can happen is the Israelis could say just because they don't have a nuclear
Right.
weapon doesn't mean that they're not still a threat, right? And they want to prolong the war. And that's when you need President Eisenhower to say,
Right.
settle down,
Because,
Francis.
because and again,
Settle down.
it's almost, it sounds almost like sarcasm, but it's not. Iran has been, quote, on the edge of a nuclear weapon for the last 40 years. It's everything you keep hearing about. So I kind of don't see where that talking point changes, either for the US or for Israel, by them not having a nuclear weapon now, or even,
Well, we need
but
to get
even with
inspections.
inspections, I think you will never have that security that says they're the core issue for Israel, I would think, is that the regime there, as long as there's that regime, they will constantly feel threatened, whether they have nuclear capabilities or not, whether inspectors are flying in there. I think, there'll always be claims that there's, some basement somewhere where they're putting a dirty bomb together or something, right? So the core issue is
Sure,
not
sure, sure, sure.
necessarily the weapon, but the fact that there's a government antithetical
Yeah.
to the existence of opposed to the existence of Israel. And now whether the US divorces itself from
Yes.
that shared perspective, I think might be key. And this is, look, I'm not even saying Israel's right or wrong. That's not the judgment I'm making. I'm saying as long as the US is tied to the interests of Israel, can we truly ever get out? Let's say the president gets what he wants. He got them to admit they were wrong. He gets them to agree to inspections, but uh, Mota Khamenei stays in there and he says, "I'm still running things. The IRGC is still running things. We're just agreeing. Okay, as long as the U.S. gets out, we're okay."
Yeah, no, I think you put your finger right on it. It's the question of the decade in the Middle East is can the United States divorce itself from the foreign policy interests of the Israeli government and cut a deal that would make Israel safer, the region safer, the United States safer, ultimately does make the Iranian people safer even if they don't necessarily even if the regime doesn't appreciate it, allows the Iranian regime to stay in power, and we march forward into an imperfect future? Or will we not take the deal that is available to us and we engage in a war for the next several years that leads to hundreds of thousands of deaths and thousands of American deaths and thousands of Israeli deaths? and at the end of the day replaces the regime with something that we we puppet up, and then we start a different clock. How long is it until that regime falls and is replaced by something that
Or
hates our
something worse.
collective guts just as much?
People forget we put the shine, we kind of took them out, so it's like it's a never-ending cycle of intervention, and that's the lesson to be learned here. All right, everyone, you've been listening to Liberty Lands. Thank you for joining us once again. Please hit the subscribe button, won't you? Help us out. Also, you can follow Mike Termott right there on his X account. You can follow me, Big John, as well on my X account. Subscribe, leave a comment. We're good with all of that. Until next time when we try this again, peace, everyone.